gunslinger, the hired gun, the desperado. Few characters have been more mythologized in America than the outlaw. Some have admired these criminals for following no man's rules. But they were thugs and killers, angry young men who reflected the social conflicts of a growing nation. In the next hour, you'll meet the top 10 most wanted outlaws of the Wild West. A list we have created of those who committed the most and worst crimes. These men were born in a time when risk-takers headed into the West's unforgiving, wild terrain, beyond the reach of the law, where only the strongest or the meanest could survive. Most historians would agree that number 10 on our most wanted list was the first major outlaw of the era of the gunfighter, which began after the Civil War. Jesse James was trained to kill in this conflict, and he never stopped. In 1869, people in Gallatin, Missouri are edgy because violence is still rampant after the recent Civil War. Two young men enter a local bank, and one heads for the teller window with a gun. This is the 6th time a new kind of crime has been committed in this war-impoverished region, the crime of bank robbery. Authorities don't know who is behind the violent crimes, led by a young man with piercing, cold eyes. But the mastermind is Jesse Woodson James, captured in this photo taken 5 years earlier at age 16, when the boy first ran off to fight in the Civil War. An entire generation of young men was trained to kill in the war between the states, a conflict which caused an unprecedented mass production of firearms. This gave rise to the outlaw era, and America has been armed ever since.
One of the most brutal things in the world is your average 19-year-old American boy.
Missourians slaughtered each other over the right to own slaves, a right the James family believed in wholeheartedly. The boy saw his stepfather tortured by Union soldiers for this belief. So Jesse joined his brother Frank to fight in the war with a gang of Confederate guerrillas led by Bloody Bill Anderson, who ordered lynchings to terrorize those opposed to slavery. Jesse's first taste of death came when Bloody Bill called for the brutal execution of unarmed Union soldiers. His violent comrades were called bushwhackers because their favorite tactic was ambush. Soon the boy hit his first human target. His baptism in blood was complete. 5 years later, in the Gallatin Bank, bitter rage still haunts Jesse James. He came to commit a robbery, but thinks he recognizes the teller as the man who killed Bloody Bill Anderson. As the armed robbers flee, one of their horses bolts. Jesse and his brother Frank jump on the same mount and gallop away. The horse left behind at the Gallatin Bank is traced by Pinkerton detectives back to the James family farm. Authorities, who had no idea who was committing the bank robberies, now have prime suspects. Lawmen surround the homestead to bring the James boys in. But the brothers make a daring escape and join their ex-fellow Confederates, brothers by the name of Younger, who had also helped in the holdups. Soon, the gang is plotting new crimes. Jesse develops a relationship with a former Confederate newspaperman who portrays the outlaw as a man righting wrongs. Many have no access to cash in post-war Missouri. The Yankee establishment that backed the Union controls most capital. So banks are perceived as corrupt institutions, as are the railroads, which the James Gang also begins to rob, to the admiration of many fellow Missourians. But Jesse James is not Robin Hood. He doesn't share the Yankee money with the poor, and his gang leaves many dead in their wake. After 2 decades of crime, a $10,000 reward is placed on Jesse's head, a temptation for 2 young men who have joined the James Gang. These trusted newcomers are Bob and Charlie Ford. The brothers visit Jesse at home, where he's contemplating retirement. As James steps up to straighten a picture, the Fords seize the opportunity to collect the reward. Jesse James' cold blue eyes are closed forever, and the Civil War that inspired him has ushered in the golden age of the gunslinger. Our 9th most wanted outlaw was born far from the West, in the violent Irish slums of New York. Billy the Kid left for the West as a young boy. He was soon embroiled in its darker side, and by the age of 19, he was a notorious killer. A crowd turns out to see a young gunslinger led toward the Lincoln, New Mexico County Jail. And by his swagger, you'd never know that he's been sentenced to die in less than 14 days. The boy's real name is William McCarty, and his alias is William Bonney, but he's already famous as Billy the Kid. The press can't get enough of Billy, a wise-talking ladies' man and a straight shot. In fact, some papers claim he has killed a man for each of his 21 years. Even though the real number may be less, the Kid's story has enthralled the nation, and dime store novels have become bestsellers from New York to San Francisco. Now he's been found guilty of murdering a lawman and is scheduled to hang. Although Sheriff Pat Garrett knows and maybe even likes Billy, it's the lawman's duty to see that the popular outlaw dies for his misdeeds. But there's nothing Billy hates more than being caged. The Kid knows he has to escape and tells the jailer he needs to use the outhouse. Sheriff Garrett has warned the guard that Billy is a dangerous escape artist who's broken out of jail once before. One of Billy's friends has hidden a lethal piece of contraband in the privy. It's a Colt 44 with the barrel cut short, making it easy to conceal. Outlaws call this weapon a belly gun because it's used to shoot at close range in the stomach. Billy makes a dash for the other guard's 3-trigger Whitneyville shotgun, nicknamed the Street Howitzer because of its power to scatter deadly metal pellets. Within 30 seconds, Billy the Kid has added 2 more killings to his name. Some say the outlaw was singing like a bird let out of its cage as he made his getaway. But the young gun has a fatal flaw: women. Despite the fact he's a wanted man across 5 states, he's soon seen dancing at a New Mexican fandango and courting the sister of his friend Pete Maxwell, the heir to a prosperous cattle ranch. Her name is Paulita, and Billy enjoys her company. But she's not the only girl that the young gun is seeing. There are rumors that he's fathered 2 daughters and a son in the county. He may also be having an affair with Paulita's cook at the Maxwell Ranch. 10 weeks after his escape, the young outlaw leaves one of his lover's beds and heads to the Maxwell Ranch for cooking supplies. Lying in ambush is Billy the Kid's old nemesis, Pat Garrett. This time, Billy has gone too far. His philandering has made him many enemies, and one has told the law where Billy is. The sheriff is no fool. He knows what a quick draw Billy has, so he hides in the shadows until the man enters.
KNS?
With one bullet, Pat Garrett has killed an American outlaw legend and will become a legend himself. When we come back, number 8 of our top 10 most wanted outlaws blows up a train, and a legendary Mexican bandito attempts a daring escape. Our 8th most wanted outlaw was the focus of one of the greatest Western films of all time, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But what the movie didn't show was the depth of Butch's desperation to quit his long and brilliant career in crime. A lone man rides toward a remote spot in Wyoming's high country. His name is Robert Leroy Parker, but he's better known as Butch Cassidy. He's heading for a secret meeting with the Union Pacific Railroad. He wants them to call off a massive manhunt and make him a free man. A year earlier, Butch and his gang, the infamous Wild Bunch, pulled off one of the largest and most successful train robberies of all time. Some trains are bank vaults on wheels, and Butch is addicted to knocking them off. He and his gang follow the Union Pacific train for days. They will soon learn it is loaded with gold. Butch plans to stop the train as it crosses a bridge. The gang stakes out the chosen spot. Then they wait until they hear the engine chugging in the distance. As the train approaches, they signal it to stop. Butch forces the engineer to back up across the bridge, and the rest of the Wild Bunch climbs on board. The train's messenger doesn't have the combination to the safe, but for Butch, that's no problem. The gang has managed to steal a new form of stable nitroglycerin called dynamite. When lit, it creates a huge volume of nitrogen in seconds. The resulting pressure wave can blow welded metal to shreds. Within hours of the robbery, the explosive news is telegraphed to the world. Depending on which account you believe, the gang has made off with up to $30,000. It's been a year since that robbery, and now Butch reaches Wyoming's high country, where the cold is made bleaker by the news that one of his buddies has been killed in the manhunt. He's arranged to meet officials from the Union Pacific to make a deal. Drop the charges against him, and he'll stop robbing trains. But as fate would have it, the railroad men are delayed by a blizzard. Butch waited for a while, but when they didn't show up, he suspected a double cross and hooked back up with his gang. Angry Butch plans to avenge himself with one last train robbery. he chooses a location where the engine must slow to a crawl. It is an almost exact repeat of the previous train robbery. Some say this time the gang made away with $50,000. But Butch's cut is not enough to retire in the style he wants to. So the mastermind, who's considered the most brilliant criminal since Jesse James, plans one more job, a bank heist. This time, the gang makes off with another $32,000. The outlaws have become stars, and they like nothing better than to pose for photographs. The Wild Bunch takes one last shot, the picture that is famous to this day. Knowing now that the authorities will never forgive him, the mastermind seeks refuge in South America. Hollywood says he died beside his friend, the Sundance Kid, in a shootout with the Bolivian military. But some relatives say he survived and returned to America to live out the quiet retirement he'd always dreamed of. Number 7 on our most wanted list was a Mexican who committed scores of armed robberies in California. He also claimed that, with enough guns, he could take California back from the Yankees. Tiburcio Vasquez was one mean hombre. A dashing bandito rides into Rancho La Brea in the frontier town of Los Angeles, a place so wild, its nickname is Los Diabolos, the place of the devils. He's the outlaw Tiburcio Vasquez, the most wanted man in California. It's not just the law that wants Vasquez. It is rumored he has a woman in many pueblos in California. Here, her name is Rosaria, a woman who will unknowingly cause his downfall. Vasquez's path to crime has its roots in California's history. When he was a boy, the state was part of Mexico, and Tiburcio was from one of its prosperous founding Mexican families. But they lost everything when America took California in the Mexican-American War. Like many angry young Californios with nothing to lose, Vasquez became a horse thief. He was a teen when he was first accused of killing a Yankee lawman. It wasn't long before the Mexican was eventually caught rustling, and jail time in San Quentin hardened him into a ruthless criminal. Vasquez has become a legend, leading an outlaw gang on a 4-year reign of terror and robbery. Now he's wanted for holding up an entire gold mining town and personally killing 3 of its citizens. But his gang's favorite targets are the stagecoaches that are loaded with gold from California's busy mines. Gold that's stored in a safe box under the guard's seat. Gold that's easy to grab because a desperado's horse moves up to 35 miles an hour and can easily outpace a stagecoach.
¡Alto ahí! ¡Arriba las manos! ¡Tú también!
Most guards surrender without a fight, as do the passengers. The stage company usually posts a $350 reward for robbers, but Vasquez has stolen so much gold and property that the price on his head is $8,000. Vasquez is generous to the many women in his life, like Rosaria. But this romance is a fatal mistake. Rosaria is the wife of a member of Tiburcio's gang. The jealous husband plots his rival's downfall. He tells the LA County Sheriff where Vasquez is hiding. The sheriff sends a posse out to capture Vasquez. After weeks of searching, the men approach a hideout near the mouth of Laurel Canyon with caution, as the bandito is armed and considered very dangerous.
We know you're in there! We got you surrounded, Vasquez! It's no use fighting!
As the lawmen surround the place, Vasquez attempts to escape. The bandito is wounded and finally surrenders. The press casts the Mexican outlaw as a romantic anti-hero. His trial draws hundreds of besotted women. Tiburcio Vasquez becomes a symbol of Mexican Californians' anger over loss of rights and property. Vasquez is found guilty of 3 murders. Rumors that Mexico is sending an army to save him prove false. As he mounts the gallows, one journalist notes that his self-possession is supreme. In the end, the bandito portrays himself as a fighter for Mexican freedom.
Y los malditos yanquis se irán a sus casas y morirán. Malditos.
Coming up, one of our top 10 most wanted outlaws starts the West's wildest shootout. And later, see how violent Western outlaws and lawmen reflected every background imaginable. Our 6th most wanted outlaw began his criminal career robbing stagecoaches. Sam Bass idolized the great Jesse James, and in his brief and violent career, became one of the West's best train robbers, and one of its most charming killers. The trains of the West are vulnerable to crime, and outlaws soon figure out how. The train engines have to stop every 15 miles to take on water for steam. As the Union Pacific's westbound number 4 slows down for a water stop, it's forced to make an unscheduled halt. A gang of outlaws climbs on board. The leader of the gang is charming Sam Bass, and this is the 26-year-old's very first train robbery. Bass brandishes the lethal .44 caliber Colt called the Peacemaker. His gang steals $1,300 worth of goods from the passengers before heading back to where the real money is, in the express car. The outlaws rough up the bank shipment's guard. Then they rummage through the contents of the vault. The first-time train robbers find astonishes them. $60,000 in gold pieces from the Denver Mint. With amazing beginner's luck, Sam Bass's first train heist has scored a record amount of money. The outlaws split up, hoping to confuse the law. But a trail of gold with the stamp of the Denver Mint leads to one of the gang members. When cornered, the wounded outlaw spills his leader's name to authorities. Overnight, Sam Bass has become the most notorious train robber in Texas. Emboldened by their success, the Bass gang begins to hit trains around Dallas. But the railroads have had enough, and they call in the Texas Rangers to stage a massive manhunt. This special force is the most experienced law enforcement agency in America. Hardened by the Civil War, they are extremely effective in bringing in outlaws, dead or alive. Rangers learn that Sam is scoping out a local bank. A local deputy approaches a man with suspicious bulges under his coat, triggering an altercation with Sam and his gang. A gun battle erupts, and Sam shoots one of the lawmen dead. For the most famous train robber in Texas, luck is running out. Sam Bass takes a shot in the back and dies on his 27th birthday. Number 5 on our most wanted list led the most feared gang of armed robbers in Oklahoma. Bill Doolin robbed at least 5 trains, 3 banks, and fought in at least 7 gun battles. His story is also about 2 friends brought into deadly conflict. By 1893, the days of the great cattle drives are ending. Barbed wire and falling beef prices have made times tough for cattlemen. And out-of-work wranglers are struggling to survive. Many gun-savvy cowboys have had to choose between becoming low-paid lawmen or high-stakes outlaws. A chance meeting at a bar reunites 2 cowboys who worked together until they lost their jobs. Bill Tillman has managed to become a U.S. Marshal. He's pleased his old acquaintance, Bill Doolin, seems to have prospered as well, until he finds out why. Doolin is wanted as leader of the Oklahombres, a bank-robbing band formed from the few members of the famous Dalton gang that survived a recent gun battle. By pure chance, Tillman is assigned with 2 other U.S. Marshals to track down and capture his friend. The Marshals and a large posse trail the Oklahombres to a rough town that is one of Doolin's favorite hangouts. The gang members are enjoying themselves in a saloon when someone notices the lawmen outside. Within seconds, one of the biggest shootouts of the outlaw era erupts. During the fight, 3 lawmen and 2 bystanders are killed, but somehow most of Doolin's gang escapes. According to legend, after months of trailing the murderous gang, Marshal Tillman approaches an abandoned shack. He's not aware that Doolin is hiding inside. The old cowboy friendship saves the lawman's life, as Bill Doolin orders his gang to let the marshal escape. Months later, when the marshals hear of the desperados' whereabouts, Tillman decides not to join them. He knows his friend won't be taken alive. The posse surrounds the home of Doolin's father-in-law, a preacher, where the outlaw has come to gather his wife and child. Bill Doolin can't escape. The friend who chose the path of crime dies at the hands of the law. Stay tuned to meet more of our top 10 most wanted outlaws, including the meanest man in Texas and the man who started his career as a child by killing his own grandparents. Number 4 on our list is one of the West's most violent men. Cherokee Bill was a killer with a hair-trigger temper and a grudge to match. His story begins with the racial conflict that was, sadly, part of the Old West. Sergeant George Goldsby won his freedom from slavery by joining the Union Army. He has high hopes for his little boy, called Bill, born of a woman with Cherokee blood. That hope is lost by the sound of gunfire. North Texas is rife with the Ku Klux Klan, which hates Buffalo Soldiers, the black cavalrymen assigned to enforce the law. Sergeant Goldsby was last seen fleeing toward the Indian Territories. His little boy, Bill, will never hear from him again. Without a father, the boy grows into a handsome con man called Cherokee Bill for his native blood. His amiable 18-year-old face masks a hair-trigger temper. A temper that explodes when he sees his girlfriend carousing with another man. Cherokee Bill will be a violent fugitive for the rest of his short life. He comes out of hiding to meet some outlaw friends who are also Native Americans to pick up the one-time payment that Uncle Sam is forcing on natives for relinquishing their lands. But someone has tipped off the authorities. The Indian Territories are marshaled by native lawmen, like the posse that surrounds the shack. Cherokee is ready with his favorite classic .73 Winchester rifle, called the gun that won the West. Long guns were more effective than side irons because of their superior range and accuracy. Because Cherokee Bill kills an Indian lawman, notorious hanging judge Isaac Parker sets a reward for $1,300, dead or alive. The outlaw now has nothing to lose. He becomes a bank and train robber and kills at least 5 more people before he's finally captured. Cherokee Bill poses with his captors with the smile he was famous for on his handsome face, only moments before uttering his final words. It is a good day to die. The death mantra of a Cherokee brave. Our third most wanted outlaw was nothing more or nothing less than a murderous thug. John Wesley Hardin was the classic Western bad guy, a man with few morals and no fear. After a long day of horse racing, players are heading for the saloons. Two young gamblers are celebrating the 21st birthday of their cousin, John Wesley Hardin, known as the nastiest boy in Texas. He first stabbed a schoolmate at age 14 and once shot a man just for snoring. Hardin's a racist who already murdered a black man, 2 Union soldiers, and 3 Indians, all in cold blood. He also brags that he single-handedly shot 5 Mexicans. As a teenager, Hardin idolized Wild Bill Hickok. He actually stalked the famous gunfighter, forcing a confrontation in the street. Hardin boasts he got the draw on Hickok, and Hickok was forced to back down. Then, so the story goes, Wild Bill asked his fan out for a drink. Hickok later admitted respect for the crazy kid, who claimed he only shot in self-defense.
I'll be damned if I ever met anyone forced to do so much self-defending as that boy, William Hickok.
By now, Hardin's killed 12 men for certain, 40 by his own count, and his motives are always the same: rage and revenge. Now, Deputy Charles Webb has the misfortune of angering the lethal shootist, who draws his exotic Russian version of the .44 Smith & Wesson. The former Texas Ranger is a dead man. The killer is eventually caught. He's forced to serve out a 16-year prison sentence in Texas' tough Huntsville prison. Memories of his family make Hardin vow to go straight, and he earns a law degree during his incarceration. But his wife dies just prior to his release, and the killer leaves jail a broken man. Within a year, Wes Hardin is drowning his sorrows and gambling in an El Paso saloon when his past finally catches up with him. Hardin's threatened yet another local sheriff, and this one takes no chances. Hardin died as he lived, a bitter and mean outlaw. Coming up next, number 2 of our top 10 most wanted, a teenage gang leader who terrorized the West. And finally, meet our number 1 worst outlaw, a sociopath whose passion for killing knew no bounds. Our second most wanted outlaw led his gang on one of the West's most violent crime sprees. Driven by rage, poverty, and desperation, Rufus Buck was responsible for 13 infamous days that terrified the West. 5 teens from the Oklahoma Territory stride into the town of Preston with stolen Winchesters and mayhem on their minds. They've been randomly marauding for over a week. The gang has sexually assaulted pioneer women, shot a child, and made ranchers dance in a hail of bullets before killing them. The leader is Rufus Buck, a 17-year-old Seminole Indian whose idol is Cherokee Bill. The other gangsters are the sons of slaves, or part black Creek Indians, and the youngest is only 15. No one knows what started this rampage, but the Indian Territory is where Creeks and Cherokees from America's eastern seaboard were forced to march over 1,000 miles during the infamous Trail of Tears, along with escaped slaves who intermarried into the tribes. Many died along the way. The Indians struggled in this bleak region for 50 years, but now the government is letting white settlers take back the land. Some who are losing what little they had respond with rage. Marshal John Garrett isn't taking any chances as pandemonium breaks out at the grocery store. When faced with an armed lawman, Rufus shoots to kill. Now that the gang has murdered a marshal, the hammer of justice is about to come down on the boys. When the Buck gang is brought in, a final photo captures just how young the boys really were. The gang is tried, not for the murders, but for the sexual assault of a white woman.
One of the most brutal, wicked, repulsive, and dastardly acts known in the annals of crime.
The Buck boys are found guilty and sentenced to march up a gallows' unlucky 13 steps. The hangman has worked out the formula for body weight versus length of rope for each boy. Too short, he will choke and struggle. Too long, his head will fall off. As Lucky Davis, Sam Sampson, Miomi July, Lewis Davis, and their gang leader face their fate, the Rufus Buck gang shows no emotion, right to their brutal end. And finally, we come to our number 1 worst outlaw, a sociopath who murdered his own kin. Jim Miller was a hired hitman who stacked up over 40 corpses, yet attended church regularly. Miller truly was an American psycho. In the small town of Pecos, Texas, church-going folks step back cautiously from a pious young man who wears a long black coat and an icy demeanor. They call him Deacon Jim because he doesn't drink or smoke. But with Jim, things aren't ever what they seem. All he cares about is killing. Of all the Western gunslingers, Jim Miller is the one you'd least want to face. Murder for hire isn't just his profession, it's his joy. His evil started early when the orphan murdered his own grandparents at age 8. Then he was sent to live with his uncle and carefully planned that man's death. Ambush is Jim's favorite method of killing, and he has no problem shooting men in the back. He has waylaid 12 unsuspecting victims. And although he reads the Bible daily, he's been paid for some of these murders. He sees a way to make his passion for killing legal by becoming a sheriff. But after one term in office, 25-year-old Miller loses the election to Sheriff Bud Fraser. A mad Miller confronts the lawman in the street. Despite what you see in the movies, dueling was rare in the Wild West, a romantic European custom. So there's only one reason why a cowardly ambush artist would agree to an honorable duel. He cheats. The sheriff's shot is true. But the killer's not dead, not even close. Is it miraculous or diabolical? Soon, Miller's dark secret is revealed. His long black coat conceals body armor. Miller will get rich taking orders to murder people and is said to have shot Pat Garrett, the killer of Billy the Kid. The hitman's career goes great guns until vigilantes lynch him in a barn. Killin' Jim Miller was the worst of the Wild West. A time and place where money was tight, guns were cheap, and life was often a struggle. Our top 10 most wanted outlaws' grim stories reflect some of the growing pains America had during its westward expansion, an era when vast stretches of wilderness were beyond the reach of the law. These men chose the path of violence, and most paid for it with their lives.